Okay, today I want to talk about how to build a personal values system that actually is an operating system for your behavior. So this is about closing the gap between the ideals you hold, the morals that you have aspirationally for yourself, and the behavior that you actually witness and can track in your daily life. How do you close the gap between those two things? Because many people try to act on their values and find that the behavior that they want to enact in their lives just does not follow. There's a lack of traction there. Not because they've changed their mind about their values, although that certainly is possible, and not because they're avoiding the cost either, but because the rhythms of their day never included the value in the first place. So this is a behavioral design issue and an implementation issue, not a consistency issue or a hypocrisy issue or something like that. It's really just about creating traction between our ideas and our actions, right? So you have somebody that says, honesty really matters to me. That's a personal value to me. And we have another video on personal values. This is actually the 9th video in a longer series on personal values that we're doing, but I'm not assuming any of that other stuff here. But and we'll link that stuff in the show notes. But so you have somebody that says that honesty really matters to me. But when the moment arises that requires them to be honest, it disappears behind phrasing and timing and kind of soft deferral, right? They might say, focus really matters to me. But the first hour of their day is already filled with, alerts and meetings and distractions, right? They say presence matters to me, but their attention has already been claimed by everything urgent. And so the breakdown is not between belief and behavior. The breakdown is between belief and implementation. So let's look at this phenomenon in our lives of when values stay disconnected. Because a value, at least traditionally conceived, is not a behavior. A value is a principle that should produce behavior under pressure and repetition and ambiguity. But most people try to live by values without installing them in the structures that govern their action, without installing those values in what are the structures that govern action? Time, routine, rhythm, energy. How do you embed and implement your values in those dimensions of life? So, philosopher that we've mentioned quite a bit throughout this series, John Dewey, in his book, Human Nature and Conduct, argues that belief is not what guides human behavior. Habit is what guides human behavior. Action doesn't emerge from intention. Action emerges from what's already practiced, what's already prepared, what doesn't require reconsideration. So if a value hasn't entered that domain of habit, what Dewey calls habitual conduct, it won't appear when it's actually needed. The moment that value costs you something, it won't show up if it's not practiced. Not because a person that claims this value has failed, but because the behavior never really had a system to live inside. A behavioral system. So, this leads us to the question, why is it not enough to just remember our values? Why is it not enough to just remember that I value something to do it? Because the mistake is assuming that remembering a value will be enough to generate that alignment. But most of the contexts in which values matter, social conflict, constraint, fatigue, ambiguity, they penalize delay. They don't allow time for recovery or reflection. And by the time the person thinks to act on their values, the moment has already passed. And this creates a functional contradiction. A value that only appears after you've already moved is not operative. It's a description of a regret, not a guide for behavior. So let's go even way further back than John Dewey. Let's go back to Aristotle. In Aristotle's terms, this is the difference between knowledge and habit. In his infamous work, Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle writes that we become virtuous not by holding beliefs, but by repeating the kinds of actions that build new behavioral defaults. They change our config file. So moral character for Aristotle is not an internal compass. It's an external regularity. And the sign that a value is active inside of you is not that it gets remembered, it's that it removes other options before the question even arises. So how you act is not even a question by the time you need to act. So, how then do values actually become functional? So, we mentioned previously that in order to implement values into life, they have to be embedded within the domains of life where habit occurs. So the first one of these is time. So we have to perform time allocation. We have to allocate time. A value must claim time, not metaphorically, but literally. A person who values reflection, I want to be a reflective person, must have blocked protected hours in their week. This is the sacrifice for the value. A person who values preparation must have fixed planning sessions embedded in their routine. This time is the sacrifice that the value requires of you. If you do not have time allocation for the value is not embedded in your life in a habitual way. So time is such an enormous dimension of life. You must consciously and explicitly sacrifice it on a recurring basis, on a habitual basis to your value. If a value occupies no explicit time by your intention, then it occupies no action. So, how values become functional? Number one, time allocation. How values become functional? Number two, attention filtration. Attention. Values should affect what qualifies as relevant input to you. So if you value honesty, then your attention must flag self-censoring as dissonant, right? If you value depth, your system must deprioritize superficial data. This filtration cannot be performed manually. It must be practiced until it becomes automatic. And then number three, so we've got how do values become functional? Time allocation, attention filtration, and then finally, and most importantly, constraint habituation. So what is constraint habituation? The final signal that a value has integrated is not inspiration, it's friction. And when you try to violate the value, the system itself resists. The behavior feels structurally unavailable to you. You don't need to ask yourself whether you'll be honest or whether you'll defer. You act in line with what's been reinforced. So these three forms, the temporal reinforcement, attentional gating, and constraint habituation, replace stated values with operational ones. So I want to draw from one more philosopher, Christine Korsgaard. So Christine Korsgaard, in her work, The Sources of Normativity, she argues that the self is constituted by what it treats as binding. So in this view, a person is not defined by their preferences or by their feelings. They're defined by what reasons they recognize as authoritative reasons. A person is defined by what reasons they recognize as authoritative reasons, even when those reasons run against mood and context and gain. And this is a useful corrective to modern value discourse, which very often treats personal values as expressions of identity. This is a forum for my self-expression. But for Korsgaard, values are not expressions. For Korsgaard, values are obligations that shape what you're capable of doing and conceiving without fragmentation. They shape your imagination. A person's value system is not what they affirm, it's what makes certain behaviors ineligible. So when violating a value begins to feel unintelligible, not just unpleasant, the structure has been internalized. So what does operating look like in practice? What does having operational values look like in practice? Well, a personal operating system is not really a set of habits or a workflow. It's just a behavioral regularity that emerges once values have shaped the conditions of my life. So you don't act on your values. Your day is built around your values. So in practice, this might look like, for example, not needing to justify blocking an evening alone because the time was claimed weeks ago. It's just natural for you to honor your values because you're comfortable asserting who you are. In this case, In this case, you see the value is not a matter of self-expression. It's a matter of habituated action that feels frictionless eventually because it's practice. Initially, you will feel the friction, but the idea is that it becomes practiced enough that you don't. So what else will this look like in practice? Well, it will also look like not performing agreement to avoid discomfort. So because the social script no longer overrides the constraint, where the constraints of your personal value system, when they conflict with social expectation or social scripts, you're fine with that. You don't even flinch at that. What else does it look like? It means that you don't skip preparation because the routine no longer requires evaluation. It's just part of what you do. These aren't merely signs of consistency. These are signs of behavioral filtration. The value system has started working inside of you because other options have stopped appearing as live alternatives. You've habituated yourself to this frame of mind behaviorally. You have built new habits. So this is the primary obstacle to turning your personal values into a personal operating system. It's the hardest thing that makes any other kind of change difficult, which is that behavioral change is hard. People talk about overcoming addiction, and addiction is very difficult thing to overcome. But part of what makes addiction difficult to overcome is that all behavioral change is hard. And then some is really hard for different reasons, right? But all behavioral change is hard. So having your values change your actions because you are elevating or increasing or deepening the connection between your stated values and your lived actions through habit cultivation, right? This is going to create friction at the boundary of that progress. At the front line of that progress, it's going to be feeling like friction, and where it feels like friction is where it requires practice. So an operable value doesn't help you make decisions. It narrows the space of action until only certain behaviors are available. That's what makes it function. You constrain the environment itself to deliver specific choices to you that align with your values. That's what makes it functional. That's what makes it real. That's what makes values real in your life, the actions. A belief may be remembered. A principle may be consulted, but a value, if it governs, removes the question entirely of whether I should remember this or not. Over time, what was once difficult becomes a default, not because it's easy, but because it's behaved, because it's built, because it is cultivated habit.